He held out his hand, and the richest man in the city looked at it like it was something dirty. That single second of humiliation, in front of 100 strangers, would come back to haunt him in ways he never imagined. If you have ever been judged before anyone bothered to know your story, this video is for you. So stay until the end, and if it moves you, hit like and subscribe, because stories like this deserve to be told. Ethan Cole stood at the edge of the grand ballroom, gripping the strap of his old canvas bag like a lifeline. Everything around him gleamed. Crystal chandeliers threw soft golden light across marble floors. Waiters in white gloves carried trays of champagne between men in tailored suits and women dripping in diamonds. Ethan wore the only decent jacket he owned, a grey zip-up that had seen better years, paired with jeans that were clean but faded from 100 washes. He did not belong here, not by the standards of this room, but his daughter's life depended on the next 10 minutes. His daughter, Lily, was 7 years old and fighting a rare blood disorder that the local hospital could no longer treat with what they had. There was one specialist, one clinic across the country, and one number that made Ethan's stomach turn every time he looked at it. He had sold his truck. He had taken a second job stacking shelves at midnight. He had emptied every account he owned, and he was still nearly $200,000 short. Someone at his old job had mentioned that Richard Sterling, the billionaire behind Sterling Industries, was hosting a charity gala that night for children's medical research. It felt like fate, or maybe just desperation wearing a hopeful face. Ethan had spent 3 days trying to get an invitation. He had washed dishes for a caterer just to get through the back door as staff, then slipped away from the kitchen the moment he saw an opening, praying no one would notice a stranger among men who had spent more on their watches than he made in a year. He found Richard Sterling near the center of the room, laughing with a circle of executives, champagne glass in hand, his silver hair combed back with the kind of precision that comes from people who have never had to rush. Ethan swallowed his fear and stepped forward. "Mr. Sterling, my name is Ethan Cole. I am sorry to interrupt, but I need only 2 minutes of your time. My daughter is sick, and I heard you fund research for children like her." The circle around Sterling went quiet. Richard turned, his eyes sweeping over Ethan's worn jacket, his rough hands, the scuffed boots that had walked miles that day just to get here. Something cold flickered behind Richard's gaze, the look of a man calculating value in half a second and deciding this person had none. "Security," Richard said flatly, not even raising his voice, as if Ethan were an inconvenience rather than a father. Ethan felt heat rush to his face, but he did not step back. He raised his hand anyway, hoping for one shred of decency, one handshake that might open a door. "Please, sir, just 5 minutes. I'm not asking for charity, I'm asking for a chance to explain." Richard looked down at the offered hand as though it might stain his sleeve. He did not take it. Instead, he turned his shoulder, cutting Ethan off from the circle entirely. "I did not build an empire by shaking hands with everyone who walks in off the street," he said, loud enough for the nearby guests to hear, loud enough for the quiet laughter that followed to sting worse than any shove. 2 security guards arrived within seconds, gripping Ethan's arms and guiding him toward the exit. He did not fight them. He had no strength left to fight anyone that night. As the cold night air hit his face outside the hotel, he sat down on the curb, put his head in his hands, and allowed himself 30 seconds to break, because Lily needed him whole by the time he got home. He never once considered how the story might not be over. 3 days later, Richard Sterling sat in his penthouse office on the top floor of Sterling Tower, staring at a phone call that had changed his entire week. His personal doctor, calm as ever on the surface, delivered the news with careful, clinical words. The mass they had found during a routine scan was not benign. The specific treatment Richard needed, an experimental therapy still in limited trials, was only being administered at one clinic in the entire country, under the direction of one leading researcher. Richard demanded the researcher's name immediately, expecting his assistant to simply schedule an appointment the way appointments had always been scheduled for him, with money and urgency clearing every obstacle. But when his assistant returned with the folder, her expression was tense in a way Richard had never seen from her. "There is a waiting list, sir, a long one. The lead researcher only takes new patients through referral or through families connected to their existing research fund." I am told it is nearly impossible to get in without a personal introduction." Richard laughed at first, the kind of laugh that comes from a man who believes his wealth can dissolve any obstacle on earth. He told his assistant to offer the clinic double their annual funding, then triple it. He told his lawyers to find every loophole. He spent 2 full days throwing money at a wall that would not move, because the researcher, it turned out, could not be bought. Dr. Naomi Reyes ran her clinic on principle, not profit, and she reviewed cases based on need and connection, not net worth. On the 3rd day, desperate and unraveling in a way his employees had never witnessed, Richard sat alone in his office long after everyone else had gone home. He stared at the ceiling, feeling for the first time in decades what it meant to want something that money could not simply purchase. In that silence, a memory surfaced uninvited. A man in a grey jacket, rough hands raised in a request for help, a handshake refused in front of a crowded room. Richard sat up sharply. He remembered the caterer mentioning something backstage, a name whispered among the kitchen staff before Ethan had been escorted out. Ethan Cole, a father who mentioned a daughter, a rare disorder, a desperate need for treatment. Richard's mind, trained for decades to connect dots quickly in business, connected them now with a different kind of urgency. If Ethan's daughter had a rare blood disorder severe enough to require specialized care, there was a real chance her case might already be known to Dr. Reyes's research network, since rare pediatric cases in that specific field often crossed paths eventually. It was a thin thread of hope, but it was the only one Richard had left. He spent the entire next day trying to track Ethan down, and it humbled him more than he expected. His assistants searched public records, old employment databases, anything they could find. It took hours of digging just to locate an old address, a small apartment on the edge of the city, in a neighborhood Richard had never once set foot in during his entire life of building towers and closing deals. He arrived that evening in a car far too polished for the cracked pavement outside the building. He walked up 3 flights of stairs because the elevator was broken, past walls with peeling paint and a hallway that smelled faintly of instant noodles and laundry detergent. When Ethan opened the door, he looked exhausted, dark circles carved beneath his eyes, still wearing the same grey jacket from the gala, because it seemed to be the only jacket he owned. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Ethan's jaw tightened as recognition dawned, the memory of that humiliating rejection rising instantly to the surface. To close the door. "Wait," Richard said, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, his voice cracked with something raw and unguarded. "Please. I am not here to hurt you or your daughter. I am here because I was wrong, and because I need your help." Ethan studied him for a long silent moment, his hands still on the door. Behind him, in the small living room, Lily lay curled on the couch under a thin blanket, her small frame pale, an oxygen tube resting gently beneath her nose. The sight of her nearly broke Richard's composure entirely. "You did not even shake my hand," Ethan said quietly, his voice heavy with old hurt rather than anger. "You did not think I was worth 2 minutes. What could you possibly need from me now?" Richard exhaled shakily, the practiced confidence of boardrooms and negotiations completely absent from his voice. "I need Dr. Naomi Reyes," he admitted. "I am sick, Ethan. The kind of sick that does not care how much money I have. She is the only one who can treat me, and she will not see me no matter what I offer her." "But I remembered what you said that night about your daughter's condition. I hope, that her case might already connect to the same research network. If I can help get Lily into that program properly, truly help, not buy my way through it, maybe there is a chance we could both find our way to the treatment we need." Ethan's eyes filled with disbelief, then something more complicated, a flicker of cautious hope threading through years of exhaustion and rejection. He stepped back from the door, silently allowing Richard inside for the first time. Over the next several days, something neither man expected began to grow between them. Richard used every connection he had, not to buy his way in, but to genuinely open doors, arranging a real consultation for Lily with Dr. Reyes's team, sitting for hours in cramped hospital waiting rooms instead of sending assistants in his place. He learned Lily's favorite cartoon while waiting for test results. He learned that Ethan worked 2 jobs and still made time every single night to read to his daughter before bed. Even on the nights exhaustion nearly swallowed him whole. Dr. Reyes, moved by the genuine desperation in both cases and the unusual bond forming between the billionaire and the single father, agreed to review both patients personally. Lily's condition, it turned out, matched a specific genetic marker being studied in an active research trial, one that could treat her illness at a significantly reduced cost through the program's funding, a program Richard now committed to personally, not as a headline for his company, but quietly, without cameras, without press releases. Richard's own treatment began the same week Lily started her new protocol. The two of them, billionaire and single father, sat in adjoining rooms on treatment days, exchanging tired but genuine smiles through the doorway between them. Richard, stripped of his usual armor of wealth and status, found himself laughing for the first time in years at Ethan's dry sense of humor, at the exhausted honesty of a man who had nothing left to prove and nothing left to hide. Months passed. Lily's color returned first, then her strength, then her laughter, ringing through hospital hallways that had once felt so heavy with fear. Richard's own recovery moved slower, but steadily, each treatment chipping away at the disease that had humbled the most powerful man in the city down to something achingly human. On the day Lily was officially declared in remission, Richard stood in the same hospital hallway where he had once sat gripping armrests through sleepless nights of uncertainty. Ethan approached him, tears brimming but a genuine smile on his face, and extended his hand exactly the way he had at that gala so many months before. This time, Richard did not hesitate. He did not glance at Ethan's simple, worn shirt or calculate anything in his mind. He gripped Ethan's hand firmly, both of them holding on a moment longer than any ordinary handshake required, because it was not just a greeting anymore, it was an apology, a friendship, and a promise all at once. "I am sorry it took nearly losing everything to understand what actually matters," Richard said quietly. "You offered me your hand when you had nothing, and I refused it because I judged you by what you were wearing instead of who you were. I will spend the rest of my life making sure I never make that mistake again." The exhaustion of the past year, finally giving way to something lighter. You showed up when it counted most. That is what matters now. In the months that followed, Richard quietly restructured a significant portion of his charitable foundation, dedicating it entirely to families like Ethan's, working-class parents facing medical crises with nowhere else to turn, no connections, no influence, only love and determination standing between their children and a fighting chance. He insisted on meeting every single family himself, sitting across from them, not as a billionaire granting favors, but as a man who remembered exactly what it felt like to need help and be turned away. Ethan, for his part, became an advisor to the foundation, using his own painful experience to help identify families who were falling through the cracks, the ones who did not know how to ask, the ones too proud or too exhausted to beg. Lily grew stronger every month, and often visited Richard's office after school, coloring quietly at the corner of his enormous desk while the two men who had once been strangers, separated by an impossible divide, worked side by side as something closer to family. Years later, when people asked Richard Sterling what changed him, the man once known throughout the industry for his icy composure and untouchable status, he never spoke about the money he lost or the discomfort of his illness. He spoke instead about a single handshake he once refused, and the quiet, humbling lesson that arrived not through failure, but through a stranger's outstretched hand, offered even after everything had already been taken from him. Pride, Richard learned, could build towers of glass and steel, but it could not save a single life, not even his own. It took losing his health, losing his certainty, and finding his way back to one honest man's open hand to understand what truly mattered all along. Real worth was never in the suit someone wore or the wealth they carried, but in the strength of their character when the world had already counted them out. If this story touched you, if it reminded you to look past appearances and offer kindness before judgment, share it with someone who needs the reminder today. Like this video, subscribe for more stories that speak to the heart, and remember, the hand you refuse today might be the one that saves you tomorrow.